board. And let's go ahead and get this started. So, and again, I'm going to invite folks out there to mute yourselves, please. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Let's get this going. So, everyone, welcome and thank you for joining to today's session. My name is Krister Lowe. I'm joined with Ruth Wageman, Gabe Abella, and Pim Harder. We will have David Pryor joining us in a little bit as well. We are faculty members teaching courses on the Team Diagnostic Survey and the 6 Conditions for Team Effectiveness framework this fall. And so we thought rather than just having one or two of us doing an introduction session on the TDS and the 6 conditions, we would do this as a team. So we're all, I think, joining the call today, passionate about the topic of teams. So we're going to try to have a team here to, get into this great topic of teams. And let me go ahead and just start off with a quote. And this is one of my favorite quotes by the late Richard Hackman, passed away a few years ago. And I often like to use this at the kickoff of sessions. So Richard said, "I have no question that when you have a team, the possibility exists that it will generate magic, producing something extraordinary, but don't count on it." And what I love about that quote is that it really, captures the promise of teams, but that oftentimes we may be using the word team very flippantly or, very loosely. And that actually, I think creating a great team isn't rocket science, but it's not something that's a guarantee. And so it's something that requires some deliberation and thoughtfulness. But if we sort of put that effort in, we can really get the benefits that great teams can bring about. So I'd like to just start off with that. And again, I'm going to invite folks joining if you can mute yourself, just to keep some of the background noise to a minimum. All right, so let me give you a quick overview of what to expect on today's session. So I want to give just a brief introduction to our presenting team today. I'm then going to start off doing a little guided visualization to kind of ground this session in your own team experiences. And then we're going to do a brief introduction to the 6 conditions framework, the Team Diagnostic Survey, and some research examples to support that. I think one of the things you'll come to appreciate about the Team Diagnostic Survey, I think it's one of the best research frameworks on team effectiveness and the instrument behind it. And so we want to just share a little bit about that research. We'll talk a little bit about the 60-30-10 rule of team intervention and coaching of teams. And I think this will sort of put the 6 conditions framework really into context around those of us who are working with teams, whether we're intervening in teams, whether we're leading teams, whether we're team members. All of these, all these different roles may benefit from an understanding of what we mean by the 60-30-10 rule. We'll talk a little bit about structural coaching versus process coaching, and then get into some storytelling from our own experiences working with teams. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the options for those of you who may want to go on a deeper dive and get a bit deeper trained in these frameworks. We have some online as well as classroom-based certification training programs, trying to make that modular options for folks. And then we'll end with some learning resources. So if you want to just continue your own self-study, where you can pursue that, and hopefully some time for some Q&A. So with that, let's just get it rolling here, and I'll just do a real quick run through. I think if we spent time introducing each presenter today with the level of justice they deserve, we would probably blow out the whole hour. So I'm going to start off with Ruth Wageman. So today we have Dr. Ruth Wageman joining the call. She's one of the seminal thinkers, I think one of the top scholars and thinkers on teams, and in particular leadership teams. And she was a colleague of the late Richard Hackman and really was the thought leader and pioneer behind this great body of work. And so it's great to have Ruth joining us on the call today. We oftentimes co-teach courses together and do webinars together. So it's always great having Ruth on the call. It's interesting, Ruth is oftentimes known for her academic credentials and her chops and, her books and articles, the 2008 book on senior leadership teams. But what most people don't know is Ruth is a deep practitioner as well, and so does a lot of great work coaching teams at all levels, including the highest, as well as working across ecosystems or across industries to bring multi-stakeholder partnership teams together. And so she has a deep level of expertise in coaching teams at multiple levels of analysis. So great having you joining us today, Ruth. We have Gabe Abella, who is an organizational coach with JP Morgan Chase. He's also a licensed Kanban trainer. And so Gabe does a lot of work in organizational transformations, introducing Agile into organizations and coaching teams around that. And so great having Gabe with us as well. And I'm going to again invite those of you who are not muted to go ahead and mute yourself. In a little bit, we're going to be having David Pryor hopefully joining us as well. David is a master certified coach. He is an independent executive coach, but also on the faculty at Columbia University's executive coaching program, and has become a real distinguished practitioner around the team diagnostic survey and the 6 conditions framework working with teams. And we also have Pim Harder, a coach and ORSC certified team coach and systems coach based out of the Netherlands, and working primarily in the education sector, but also in businesses and in the with the Dutch police force, and one of our Dutch practitioners and colleagues joining us on the call. And I'm Krister Lowe, an organizational psychologist, and I am the founder of the Team Coaching Zone and a podcaster. I have a podcast called the Team Coaching Zone, which some of you may be familiar with. And it was there a couple of years ago that I discovered Ruth and her work, and which brought me back to some of my memories in graduate school, where I had read Richard's book, Leading Teams, Setting the Stage for Great Performances, and that really kicked off my journey and niching in this area of teams, and in particular in the area of team coaching. So great to have this distinguished group here, and I know we also in the audience today we have a lot of great experience working with teams. So excited about the capability and power we have on the call today, just collectively with all of us here. So looking forward to make this a dynamic session. So folks, we're going to start off this session today as an all good adult learning with grounding this topic of team effectiveness in your experience. And so what I'm going to invite you to do just for a moment is go ahead and close your eyes. I'm going to take you down a brief journey down memory lane. And what we're going to be doing is kind of just scanning throughout, going back to even your childhood, through your adolescence, into your adulthood, and start to just think a little bit about some of the teams that you've been a part of. These may be great teams that really stand out from your experiences, or teams that really, really fell apart, didn't work so well, or maybe even teams that had a blend of both. They had some good and the bad and the ugly all together. And so just scan the horizon of your team experiences and notice which teams come to your mind. And as you do that,
Woodside, this is the train to Penn Station.
It sounds like we have somebody also on the train to Penn Station. So I'll try to meet you guys out there. And so again, as you're scanning the horizon of these team experiences, try to just pick one of the teams that most stands out for you. Again, it could be a great team experience. It could be a really bad team experience. And I want you to try to go back to that time. Remember what it felt like to be on that team. Who were the people? What did it feel like? What was the energy of that team? And even in your body, what do you notice about your body? Is it expanding, getting excited? Is it contracting? Really shrinking? The emotional memory of that team, you're retreating, leaves a bad taste in your mouth, conjuring up that example. And I want you to just think about what was it that made that team so good or so great, or that made that team so ineffective? If you had to boil it down to a couple of the key factors, what comes to you? And if you had to just pick one of those factors, what would you pick? So there may be more than 1, 3 or 4 factors, but if you had to boil it down, one magic factor that you think most contributed to that team's success or failure, what would it be? And what we're going to do is I'm going to invite you when you're ready to come on back. And what I'd like you to do is in the chat window, just pop that factor into the window, whether it was a great team or a poor team or somewhere in between. Just go ahead and drop your, one word or a couple words on what that factor was that really most contributed to that team's effectiveness. So we have shared motivation, role confusion, camaraderie, Looks like a lot here coming in about trust, about having an exciting mission or goal, meaningful purpose. A lot in here about mission and purpose, trust. We have Gary talking about leadership, a sense of solidarity. Andre, good to see you here, Andre. Shared excitement, people who cared, shared purpose and transparency. Lots of great stuff coming in here. Co-created the outcomes. Love this. Shared decision-making, common goal, a real purpose, respect, liking each other. Yeah, interesting one, Ruth, here. Way too big to get anything done. We'll come back to that, I'm sure, in today's session. Synergy, working together. I had an unhealthy individual. So that's interesting when you have and maybe that's something we'll talk about is when is it an unhealthy individual or when is it just a deviant person who may not fit the norm of that group and the group kind of tries to cut that person out even though they might be adding a real valuable perspective. And so how do you know the difference between when is that an unhealthy individual versus somebody who may just have a different way of thinking? Silo mentality, psychological safety. So great stuff here. So, I think we could actually download this chat and do a little bit of a word cloud on it later, or maybe I could do that offline as the webinar unfolds. But, obviously there's lots of things that influence whether a team is effective or not. But I think if you notice, there are some clusters in there. So there's some things in there about having a real clear and compelling and exciting purpose. Something about how the team members relate to each other, and do they create trust and synergy? Are they able to sort of be more than the sum of the parts? Are they actually creating outcomes or results, right? So if we actually took all of your different factors, I think we'll find that they actually cluster around a handful of key things. And so, yeah, I'll try to see if I can do this, Ruth, in terms of a word cloud. But what we want to do is sort of take all of that and boil it down into, if we were able to sort of take all of the different things that predict an effective team and sort of really get our hands around a handful, which would be the ones that most would have the influence, most that really should be on your radar in terms of when you're coaching or designing or helping launch teams that really will give you the most bang for your buck and stack the deck in favor of a great team emerging. What I'm going to do is invite Ruth in here to kick us off on starting to introduce the 6 conditions framework, because I think she and Richard and a number of other team scholars up at Harvard have really been studying the things that most predict team effectiveness. And I think they've been able to boil that down to a handful that are the ones that have the biggest levers. And I think you're going to find all of what you guys said in the chat window sort of captured in the framework that we are going to be introducing. So Ruth, can we invite you on here to?
Yeah, thanks, Krister. I'm glad to do it. And so one of the things I'd like to observe is that there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of experience in this group that's convened here, and a lot of themes, as you say, among the things that tend to be associated with each other in a really great team and a really great team experience, and the things that seem to be associated with each other for a really poor team and a poor team experience. And a lot of the research that Richard Hackman and I and our colleagues have been doing over the course of our decades of research is really asking the scientific question of what are the drivers, like what's the causal chain in what actually leads to great processes and ultimately leads to great team performance, effectiveness, and learning over time. That's the scientific question. So, what leads to what and ultimately predicts those outcomes, but also fundamentally the practical question, which is if you wanted to influence team effectiveness, where is your greatest point of leverage? How can you actually make a difference and increase the chances or stack the deck in favor of teams becoming really, really brilliant performing units and really on a positive trajectory and really contributing to the well-being of members over time? And so here, this sort of causal flow, Krister, if you would just play out the slide for the next few here, that we have over many decades of research come to understand about teams by studying them in many different contexts and longitudinally and both experimentally and observationally and the like, is we draw this sort of map here that there are conditions, design conditions in place in the team, conditions in the larger context that lead to certain kinds of emergent processes happening in the group for better or for worse. So the conditions might refer to things that people in this community that's gathered here named, like the team has a compelling purpose, or it's way too big, or there are really talented people in the team. That might be the set of conditions. Those things tend to influence what actually emerges in the way that people work together, for, as I say, for better or for worse. So it could lead to a high degree of energy and commitment, or it could lead to really routine and unthoughtful task strategies. It could those conditions could result in a low level of trust. And ultimately, those processes influence what we think of as team effectiveness. As I say, the performance of the team, whether it's getting better over time, and its impact on individuals. One of the things I want to underscore, I'll just cite one of my favorite academic article titles ever that Richard and I drew a lot from in the course of our work, and that is, the title is "The Conspicuous Absence of Evidence That Process Consultation Improves Team Task Performance." And so now that you know the title, you probably don't actually have to read the article. The underlying point was, we have a tendency to put a lot of our emphasis and our energy in trying to fix a team or to coach it to greatness by really working on those processes, the relationships, the effort, the energy, the trust, and the like, when in fact, where the really powerful leverage lies is in those conditions. And so our work over the course of the last several decades, you can see published in Richard Hackman's book, Leading Teams, that Krister mentioned earlier. You can see it in the book that Deb Nunes and Jim Burris and Richard Hackman and I published on senior leadership teams, is really addressing in a very practical way what are the handful of conditions that leaders and teams can directly influence and deliberately design and put in place to increase the chances that the processes that emerge will be healthy and that ultimately teams will be effective. So let me give you a quick summary of what we have seen are those 6 conditions for team effectiveness. And the picture I'm presenting to you up here is actually the kind of overview that you would get of a team from the Team Diagnostics survey. So the first 3 conditions we refer to as the essentials. These are the fundamental building blocks, the sturdy platform that really must be in place for a team to be effective. And first and foremost, I know this may be actually, if you're looking on a handheld device, this might be difficult to read, but at the top of the pyramid is a real team. If you want to have a great team, first and foremost, you have to create a real team where we are bounded. We know who is in the team and who is not. We stay together for some significant period of time, and we're genuinely interdependent. The members actually have to work together and exchange resources in order to accomplish some meaningful task. I will just underscore that many of the things that we get asked to examine or to help with in organizations really are teams in name only. They're just all the people that belong to a particular department or that report to a particular leader. They are not interdependent, and they don't necessarily need each other in order to accomplish a shared piece of work together. So first condition, real team. Second of the essentials is a compelling purpose, as many of you named. A purpose that is challenging. It will be a real stretch of members' capabilities to pull it off. It is clear so that members would know what success would actually look like, and it is also consequential, meaning it has real impact on the lives and work of others so that members of the team experience it as deeply intrinsically motivating. And then the third of the essentials is having the right people. So people whose capabilities can actually contribute to that compelling purpose, including having the fundamental teamwork skills that are needed to work together with other human beings effectively, and having an adequate diversity of perspective in order to really be able to contribute multiple perspectives to a problem. Then the next of the 3 conditions are what we call the enablers. And these are 3 conditions that we have found in our research accelerate the development of a fundamentally well-designed team into a really superb performing unit. And those include a sound structure, meaning the team does meaningful team tasks when they work together. They are small enough to actually get work accomplished, and they have some explicit rules or norms of conduct about what's acceptable and what's unacceptable behavior in the group. The second of the enablers is a supportive context. That is, the organizational structures and systems actually make it easier for teams to work together rather than placing obstacles in their way. So, for example, the reward system provides positive consequences for excellent team performance, not just individual performance. Or the information system is providing to teams the data and information they need in order to manage their work effectively. And then lastly of the three enablers is team coaching, someone who can intervene in real time in the process, ask a few good questions, help the team to make the best possible uses of the considerable resources that they have. And then that last term that you saw in the middle of you can see in the middle of the model, we have a very particular perspective on team leadership, and that is effective team leadership is getting these 6 conditions in place for a team and keeping those conditions in place over the life of a team. So you can see, going back to this conditions thinking idea, really, this actually comes out of the notion of understanding teams as complex social systems. You can deliberately design each one of these conditions, deliberately and intentionally install them for a team. And then you have to sort of turn it loose and watch what processes emerge, because teams, being complex social systems, chart their own course to what their performance and what their future actually looks like. In our model, what we have found are the primary processes that really emerge out of great design and that directly relate to how well the team performs are the level of effort in the team. So how much are people working together and putting in energy and building shared commitment to the team and to its work. Secondly, task strategies. So is the team being innovative, inventive, and well coordinated in the way they work together? And then thirdly, how well are they actually using the full range of knowledge and skill in the group? And we've made a pretty strong statement in our research, which is that to the extent that these 3 key task processes are in good shape in the long run, as a consequence of those 6 conditions being in place, you are much more likely to see the ultimate criteria of team effectiveness turn out well over time. And those criteria are: how well is the team performing, meeting the needs of its clients and constituencies? Secondly, what is the quality of the group processes? Is the team showing signs of getting better and better over time rather than worse and worse? And then finally, what's the impact of the team on the members themselves? Are members growing and learning and accomplishing more as a consequence of their work in the team? This overall picture, this snapshot that I've showed you here is a snapshot of the overview that you would get of a team out of the team diagnostic survey. The way that it's presented in the team diagnostic survey, sort of classic stoplight colors. So where you see some yellow or some red are signs that this aspect of the team's conditions are not very well designed. And where you see green, they're actually in pretty good shape. And so this is a way of actually taking a look at any individual team and saying, are there signs of trouble in this team's future or indeed in this team's present? And what would we expect to actually happen to this team over time? So just to say a couple little words about the team diagnostic survey itself. Richard and I and our colleague Erin Lehman took all of the best of the survey measures that all of us as scholars had created over many years to measure the 6 conditions, to measure team effectiveness, to measure these key task processes. And we created and validated on a new sample an instrument we came to call the Team Diagnostic Survey. It is a very well validated and also peer-reviewed instrument that we published an article about it and its predictive and construct validity in the Journal of Applied Behavioral Sciences some years ago. We've done significant modifications and improvements on the basis of those validation studies since then. And what the Team Diagnostic Survey does is invite all of the members of a team to respond to a set of descriptive questions about the team, and it provides feedback to the team and to the leader about what is in really good shape on the 6 conditions for team effectiveness and what are the possible warning signs of some poor design. helping the team to set priorities about what they could be working on around improving their essential and enabling conditions. It gives them feedback about, of course, those key task processes and how well they're performing, and all kinds of rich supplemental material, including some feedback for the team leader about how well that team leader is providing, for example, different kinds of coaching, feedback for the team in around a variety of things that they are doing, including the quality of the coaching they provide each other, the degree to which certain healthy emergent processes like psychological safety and a team learning orientation are growing in the team over time. And there's also lots of rich color in the qualitative feedback to the teams about what the team is sees itself as doing particularly well and what they most feel need to change in order to improve their effectiveness. And all of this is actually designed to help those of you who work with teams or team leaders or teams themselves to take a look at those high leverage opportunities, particularly in the three essential conditions and the three enabling conditions, and really enable them to set concrete and practical priorities for how they can increase the chances of having a really great team.
Awesome, Ruth. Just before we kick it over to Gabe, who's going to help us sort of then move this into, so how do we actually use this as practitioners? And he's going to introduce the idea of the 60-30-10 rule and this idea of structural versus process coaching. But before we go there, I think one of the great things about the 6 conditions framework is the research behind it, not just academic, but in real world, with real world teams, lots of different types of teams. I'm curious if you have, a study or two out there, whether it's your leadership team's work or the work in the intelligence community, that you could share just a little bit about some of the research behind it.
Sure. So, I've spent the last dozen years or so focusing my attention on the particular challenges that are faced by senior leadership teams. And we conducted a study of more than 120 senior leadership teams from 12 different countries around the world, many different industries, and primarily in private sector organizations, but a handful of not-for-profits and a handful of public sector organizations. And we captured really good data about the 6 conditions for team effectiveness for these senior leadership teams, and also collected independent assessments of how effective these teams were in leading their organizations and how well they were meeting the needs of their many complex constituencies. And we looked at what are the particular challenges that we see in senior leadership teams that seem to be special or unique to the challenges that they face. So what I would say overall is that the 6 conditions for team effectiveness are indeed extremely powerful and important predictors about how well a leadership team is leading on behalf of its organization. We found that only about a quarter of the leadership teams out there are actually effective teams. The vast majority of them are seriously underserving some of their constituencies in many ways. And among the challenges that we found in our research is that very often a senior leadership team tends to be a team in name only. They are operating in silos. They don't have a clear purpose that really articulates what is the unique added value of this group of people that they must do together over and above what the individual's primary individual responsibilities are. And in particularly, we found a very powerful effect of norms. That it was only the really outstanding leadership teams in the sample that had been crystal clear about what the expectations were about how people should and shouldn't behave in working in senior leadership teams. So that's one of the examples of how we have used the 6 conditions model to really understand in a deep way what gets in the way of the effectiveness of some pretty significant teams and organizations and how you can actually help them to improve their performance effectiveness overall. The last observation I'll make on that one is we saw that the majority of senior leadership teams are really missing some key ingredients, especially in the essentials. And it is remarkable how rapidly the performance of those teams improve when you when you do what we came to call a team relaunch and really get the right people around the table, keep them together as a real team, working towards a compelling purpose, it is remarkable how quickly those teams turn around and become capable of really aligned strategic leadership of their enterprises.
Great. We had a quick question in the chat here, Ruth. You say 12 countries. Any Asian countries?
Yes, actually, three of them in the sample. I probably won't remember them all accurately, but yes, this was really pretty global sample.
Yeah. And I know that TDS has been translated into some other languages, and I came across a study of tech teams in Asia, I think in Taiwan, where they had used the TDS on teams. So the TDS has been used around the world. One of the great research, in addition to the Leadership Teams book, which is one of my favorites, there's some really compelling stuff in the intelligence community work that after 9/11, Richard, I think you were involved in this as well, Ruth, were involved in helping the intelligence agencies, the United States government, really collaborate across agencies, because there was a lot of problems in the collaboration. And Richard's 2011 book, Collaborative Intelligence, Using Teams to Solve Hard Problems, has some pretty cool stats in there around intelligence analysis teams that were either real teams or just co-acting working groups. And they found that the real teams were 70% more effective than the co-acting groups, and also found the role of a peer coaching culture or peer group coaching was really powerful in those teams. So I think it's intriguing around which of the conditions in different types of teams have the biggest levers, right? And it's not static, right?
Yes.
For different types of teams. Awesome. Well, with that, I think, Gabe, we're going to, in our little team presentation here today, we're going to kick it over to you to help us move this into, so how do we as practitioners, as coaches, as team leaders, harness the value of this research and really leverage it in service of helping teams put the conditions in place to really to create great performances. So you want to take it from here?
Yeah, excellent. So I'm gonna add on to the metaphor Ruth just used very quickly, though. She said stacking the deck, which is of course in Richard's book, which is what are the things that you would at least for this would look at here, the 60-30-10 rule is really this elegant rule, heuristic that Ruth has been writing about and sharing for us as team coaches, which is where do we focus our energy, our finite energy and time when we're actually dealing with teams, we're either coaching them or leading them or even being a team member. And so the way the 60-30-10 rule works is that they kind of work in order, by the way. So not only the effort, but the actual timing of which you're going to focus your energy. So in this first case, the 60% is the pre-work, and then I'll again reuse this term that Ruth is mentioning, which is intentional design, which is if you're going to have a team do work or have work for a team, there are many things you can address or think about before you commence the actual work itself. And so those are the 6 conditions that Ruth aforementioned too. And that's, again, discussions that I would have as a coach or leader would have within themselves at reflection, which is, do I have any of these 6 things in place? Do I have more work to do before I actually convene this team to do more work? The 30% is the effort which is placed in launch. And really this is, again, a metaphor, which is you're breathing life into the team. And as a leader of a team or as a coach, you are, you're articulating meaning, which is the intent of the team, even in introducing ways to co-create the structure and norms of the team itself. This is not to be taken lightly as well. If you think about some of, again, maybe some of you have been, who did the exercise at the beginning where you thought of a good team, you probably did spend some time together thinking about how you might work together, even closing some gaps on things that might be missing with relation to training or, again, structuring or understanding the way that you're going to work. So that's really the launch perspective. And then lastly, this 10% ongoing coaching is sort of something interesting for us as coaches, because the way I perceive it and the way I view it, I think this is something that also Ruth and Richard have written about and speak about, which is I believe that coaching is a verb, not a noun. And as much as I would love to be valued as a noun, which is I come in and bring the coach and let's go spend some time with the coach, a lot of Ruth's research has really proven out that it really doesn't matter who does the coaching, as long as the coaching exists and it is actually very, very effective. It's skillful coaching. So there is, again, types of unskillful coaching that could hurt you as well. But again, when I look at a way, introduced to a team and asked to look at a team, I will start really back at the design, which is, okay, I'll have an honest discussion with the leader. Okay, what have we thought about? What things you thought about? Why does this team exist? Is a team really necessary? Which is also our next favorite question, which is a team really required for the work that you're actually doing? So those are really a nice, elegant way for me as a coach to focus my efforts when I'm actually intervening. Because sometimes, and I'm sure maybe some of the coaches feel this way, you'll be asked to look at a team, and the subtext of that request is, can you fix my team? Which is, can you fix them versus actually looking what else might be going on? And so now the next slide we can talk about is, Krister, if we advance the next slide, which is another way of ways of coaching, or ways that you might approach teams that are doing work. And there's two ways to look at it, which is sort of structural versus process coaching. And what I see, at least for me personally, which is these are lenses in which I might view a team and then maybe guide the way I might intervene. And so process coaching might be something that most people are really familiar with, and maybe has a lot of training and experience with, which is, can you look at the way the team is communicating, interacting, collaborating? And if it isn't going well, then that would certainly maybe motivate you to intervene at those specific areas of communication and collaboration. So you might do some conflict resolution sort of training, and maybe have some more deeper facilitation on, let's explore the way that people are interacting, making assumptions about what people are doing. And certainly that's certainly helpful in some ways. But I guess the other lens that we would apply when you're practicing grounded in the team diagnostic and the team effectiveness model, which is, you can also take a step back and go, well, what are the conditions? What's the environment that the team is actually operating in? And again, we go back to those 6 conditions. Are those things present? And then generally, I mean, again, I've seen this firsthand, and Ruth and Richard write about this well, which is, when you see dysfunctional behavior at the process level, it's usually caused by something else at the conditions level. And then usually when you address the condition, the dysfunction sort of goes away. It's sort of, I know that Ruth and again, Richard write about this, which is, most people think that a team that feels good about itself does great work, when in fact, the causal relation might be the opposite, which is, a team that does great work or is able to do great work feels good. So an example of that would be, if you've ever watched any sort of world championship of a sport, whether it's the World Series or the Super Bowl, they'll interview the teams. By the way, they're world-class teams. And they'll first go into the winner's locker room. And you'll see they feel like they did great work. They feel like great about themselves, they're high-fiving each other. And then, because they did great work, so like, oh, wow, that's great. That's how it's supposed to feel after you win. And then you actually look at, then they go to the loser's locker room, you see the mood completely different, right? Which is, they did great work as well, right? But now, they're a little bit more sullen, they're a little bit more, disappointed and so forth. So if you were to actually just take just fly into that locker room, you knew nothing about the outcome of the game, you might actually try and intervene and go, oh, guys, we need to do some other activities to make yourself feel better about yourself, to create some more communication, when in fact, they didn't do great work. And so I see that a lot now. And in fact, I mean, again, going to the 60-30-10 rule and these lenses of actually viewing, helping you look at teams and having some skillful ways in which you might intervene is really helpful for me as a team coach. It's really changed the way that, again, I look at teams and how I can skillfully advise leaders and other coaches and even members within the team that also are providing coaching amongst themselves to be great teams.
Great, Gabe. Good stuff. Thank you for that that segue. We're going to kind of get into some storytelling here. I just wanted to note that there's some great questions coming up. One of them was around mentioning leader and coach in the same breath. Is it really possible for a leader to be a coach, as they are an integral part of the team system, Phil, in Singapore? And as I was thinking a little bit about your question, Phil, one of the things we know about leadership, that leadership has its most leverage and impact really in the early stages of a team. So actually research, from Richard again, shows this, that, if you were to sort of put all your chips down on the table of when a leader can have its most impact, it's in that early stage of designing the conditions for teamwork. And that's when the active leadership is so critical. And so after that, really, in a way, that's when a leader, I think, could take on much more of a coaching role with the team. And that's really what the team needs. And whether it's from the leader, the team itself, or an external coach. And again, that may be a function of the leader's skill, again, if they're able to create that, to move from being more of a directive manager or leader that's setting in motion the end goal of the team and the structure, to then shifting into more the dynamic emergent type of coaching that's needed. I guess that may vary leader by leader. I'm curious, Gabe or Ruth or Pim, do you have any other comments about Phil's question there about that challenge of can a leader be a coach at the same time?
So I have an opinion on that, and I'll certainly allow Ruth and Pim to pile on. My work is also dealing with transformational change as well as evolutionary change, was actually sort of reflecting back on how you might want to operate in the future. And I think that's a fair question, which is, can a leader be a coach of a team? And my personal opinion is, again, if you look at coaching as an activity and as a skill versus a role, then the answer is yes. And then going back to what Ruth and Richard write about, which is, it doesn't matter who provides the coaching as long as it's good. And then further, Ruth's research bears out the fact that teams that learn how to coach each other end up being more likely to be high performing than those that require some sort of external intervention from coaching. But I have seen in many cases where leaders actually having the skill of coaching and then applying it skillfully and in the right way to get to increase the likelihood of great outcomes and actually getting a great outcome. So I'd love to hear what Pim and Ruth have to say about that.
Yeah.
I think I would, I certainly concur with what you had to say, Gabe. The one thing I would add is I do view it as a leadership responsibility to make sure that the team has coaching. And sometimes that's actually something that leaders take up really well. It's harder for them to do it when they're in the middle of the issue that's on the table. But making room for someone to be paying attention to the process in a way that they can help the team decide, is this working and isn't it working? And I think there are a few pretty powerful techniques that you can help leaders develop that allow them to step pretty effectively into a coaching role, like leading really great debriefs or holding sort of mid-course reviews and inviting the team to do some reflection together about how effective they are. That's not, I think, something that's realistic to expect of leaders when they're deeply in the work process or the issue that's on the table. To be paying attention to the team dynamics at the same time, I think is asking a little bit too much of most people.
Yeah. So I know there's some really rich questions and comments in the chat there. And so I'll encourage folks to check out what's going on there. Maybe we can pull some of those out. But what we thought we might do here in the next few minutes is just share some stories from real world intervention and share a bit of stories. So I'm going to share one just hot off the press from, just recently. And then Pim has a story. I'll invite Gabe as well. So just to kind of seed a little bit about how we've been using this framework in our practice and the value we think it's creating. So I was just working with a team recently, which was a senior leadership team in the financial technology sector. And so, as many of you have seen, technology, I think historically has been more of a support function, but are increasingly finding themselves at the table with business leaders and getting the seat at the table, which, for a long time, maybe they didn't have. And so being able to sit at the business table with business leaders and, is really critical. And so the story of this organization is increasingly their revenues being driven by financial technology products. And so in this one area, a CIO was promoted for a business line. Her team was expanded from 4 direct reports up to 9. She added a few additional ones who weren't direct reports to her, but were indirectly critical to the success of that team. And so much revenue is being driven by this part of the organization that they expanded to something like 500 developers in their area. And sort of the success of this line of business was really critical and contingent on this team. And so they had the leader had a 3-year roadmap, but really felt like if they were going to succeed, they couldn't do it alone. The agenda, the transformation agenda was just too ambitious. And yet the leaders in her team were not co-located. They were spread across Europe, Asia, and America, United States. And that for whatever reason, even though they had a very compelling purpose to achieve as a collective, they just weren't really gelling as a new team. And so they contacted me back in January. And we kind of went through this sort of round of scheduling dates to bring the team together to do a proper launch. And the dates kept slipping. And so the months were going by. And finally, we got the team all together in New York just last week for 2 days. And so already 8 months, almost 8 months had gone by. And in the absence of really thoughtfully designing the team, getting the conditions placed, really getting clear about how the team was going to win together and what their must-win battles would be. Sorry, I have a little a companion here in the background who just got fired up. What happened was in the team, basically some negative processes started to emerge. So mistrust, territorialism, a lack of sharing. They started to battle each other at the level of personalities. And so even though, overall, they couldn't really afford to be playing that way. And also, if they're going to step up as a team of leaders representing and sitting at the table with business leaders, having their shop back home in disarray really wouldn't be helpful. So the good news is we're able to bring them together. We had to spend some time really establishing some psychological safety in the team. We then really once we did that, we got them into a good place. We could really get into their mission and getting really clear about their must-win battles as a team. In particular with the horizon that they could see, right? So by the end of 2018, the must-win battles. And then we really dug into crafting how are they, given the limited amount of time they spend together, a weekly virtual call, a handful of in-person meetings, they were going to win together. And, after 2 days, we came out of that. I think we were able to take advantage of the 60-30 rule and right the ship of this team. And, they're off to a good start. We ran the TDS on them and they were pretty much yellow and red across the board on the 6 conditions, the key task processes. They weren't leveraging their talent. But, it really showed the value of a lot of what was manifesting in the team was manifesting at the level of emergent processes. And just to work there on trust building and, creating psychological safety wouldn't be enough. We had to go back and really get their team's design in place so that when we do start working on those emergent processes, the structure's in place. And I'm feeling really good about that team's righting the ship. But it's a story of missed opportunity or potentially missed opportunity and how the beginnings are these really critical moments to create the conditions for a team to really get a good start. So that's a little story, hot off the press for me. Tim, I know you have an interesting story that emerged for you in the education space, and would love for you to come on and share a little bit.
Yeah, I will. Time ago, I was asked by the team leader of this educational team that works with refugee children, the age of 12 to 18, to help him with his team. And over the past year, this team had grown from 3 teachers to 10 teachers. And because of the growth, they were relocated to another location. So there had been a lot of change. And the original teachers had all kinds of doubts about the skills and the knowledge of the new teachers that came in, because the majority of them was not formally trained to work with refugee children. So what happened was that team norms and values were not clear. And what we saw happening was a lot of toxic communication. By that time, I was just certified as a foundational practitioner for the TDS. So I thought, well, let's bring the TDS in and see what's going to happen. So I decided to run the TDS on this team. And when the results came back, I was surprised to see that everything was orange and yellow. But there was one highlight, and it was the highest score being a 3.58 for compelling purpose. So there was something there that was interesting. But coming from my background as a CTI and ORS trained coach, I started out after sharing the results with the team on working on the relationship. So we did have a wonderful event, but only to find out 2 weeks later that nothing had really changed. So the next meeting we had, what I decided to do was to work on the 6 conditions and really starting with the compelling purpose, because there was something there. The work those teachers are doing does make a difference in the world. It makes a difference for the children I'm working with. So we started there. And coming from the compelling purpose, they created the first action steps as a team. And so what happened, they prioritized the work, got the work. We introduced a sort of Kanban style approach to the work. And the funny thing is, they found it easier to speak about the work that had to be done than about the relationships. And eventually, they became more effective. They started working together better, and they still have a long way to go, but things are changing and they're getting better results because of not directly focusing on the relationships, but really getting that to work on the 6 conditions. So for me as a team coach, the TDS has really been a game changer by doing that, because normally I would have with that relationship and kept on working that. And I've been doing this with other teams as well, and what I see is that the result, I get my results much faster than previously. Okay.
Cool. Thanks, Pim. A great story of, I think, just the interplay of the structural conditions versus the emergent processes we were talking about. And again, it's not to say emergent processes aren't important, things like safety and trust and all that. It's just, again, it's getting them in right alignment. And if you don't have the underlying basis of a team, it's like hard to drive a car down the road and focus on steering and driving and accelerating if the wheels are falling off and the basic structure isn't fit for purpose.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that. Gabe, I'd love to get a story in from you as well.
Yeah. So I engage teams at the work level as well as the leadership level. And so I really, one of the things that was really important for us when we thought about introducing this mindset and this tool into our practice is how would we actually use it? Because we're a large organization. We're not going to TDS 50,000 teams and see any outcome of it, right? So how could we best use that? And so what we found just through our practice, it's just an amazing teaching tool, because you can imagine that many leaders of teams, quote unquote managers of teams, bring with them their own mental models and their own backgrounds and histories on how they've been successful teams. And so we were asked to intervene with actually just to provide coaching to a team, and found that this would be a great opportunity to introduce the ideas in the model to the immediate manager as well as the managers above, and really are in that department. And so we're very clear with the department leader as well as the manager team. Look, this is something that we would love to do with you. We'll learn together from this, and it's not really, I think the other thing we mentioned is that when we roll out, we introduce this to teams, we say it's not a judgment on you. It's a judgment on the environment in which you're working in, because depending on where you are introducing it, there can be, quite guarded or even skeptical or even fearful of what you might be trying to do. And so that's one of the things we had to do, was establish trust. And so we ran after introducing the model to the manager and then the team, we ran the diagnostic and had a debrief, which was great because it uncovered something that we think we encounter a lot in the context of a work team, and maybe the assumptions you have about work teams, and especially knowledge work, in this case, software development. And we found that right off the bat, the first condition of real team, and specifically stability, is something that depending on where you work and how you believe the work it needs to be accomplished, you may or may not believe that stability is an important part of team effectiveness and outcomes. And in this case, it absolutely was. And so as we ran the debrief, we realized through exercises that literally, so this is a team that was working in sprints and in agile methods, and so really short iterations of about 2 weeks. And for the year that last year they were together, they found out they actually didn't have a stable team for two sprints in a row, which would be a month over the last year, which is their team membership changed 12 times in the last year. And you could sense this frustration amongst them, and really was like, because one, they're not in control. The actual people doing the work were not in control of the decisions being made as to who should be in the team, who should be out of the team, and some of that stuff was out of their control. But it allowed us to actually just have an honest conversation, which is with the leader of the team, which is, what is the impact of it when someone is replaced, with or without the consent or advisement of the team? Or we start all over again. We have to teach everybody. This is why our productivity suffers. And so it allowed us to have that conversation within the team and with the leadership, and then more so with the leadership of the other levels of that organization, which is, what is your view of the way that the work gets done in this organization? And do you realize the decisions you're making as to whether stability is something you value or not is absolutely having effect on the way people do their work? So we love that as an example of really using it as a teaching tool, right? I don't have, if I have a department of 100 teams, I don't really have the time or effort really to to run 100 TDSs, right? That's not really what the point is for. The high leverage is where you actually influence the leaders of the teams that are making decisions about those 6 conditions, about the intentional design and ongoing coaching of those folks that are really going to promote growth and the team effectiveness, both at the individual level, the team level, as well as increasing their capabilities.
Nice. I see your head nodding, Ruth. You want to echo something there? Or
it was part of what was coming up in the chat, because there's some inquiries, and I think it's true of a lot of people's practice, that you deal with teams that are unbounded, and they have fuzzy boundaries and shifting team memberships, and individuals are members of multiple teams. And a lot of the common writing about teams these days is, well, they're much more dynamic. You can't actually have real teams. And I think that is a bit of a myth. And to hear what you're talking about is sort of intervening at the system level and saying, do you value teamwork or not? Very often the instability is not because you can't keep teams intact. It's because you're trying to solve some other problem that is having unintended consequences for people's ability to work together effectively. So, I appreciate the lessons in that story very much, and how leaders actually can be helped. Leaders in the system can be helped to see that they could make slightly different choices and radically improve people's ability to do what they're being asked to do.
Yeah. So I appreciate these stories, and I think it maybe is a good segue. We just have a few minutes left here in our session. While this research, the 6 conditions of the Team Diagnostic Survey, goes back a number of years, really we just commercially brought it out last August. And so really excited last August, this time of year, we actually launched a webinar and got the TDS rolling. We've certified about 250 people around the world now, both either in an online certification or in classroom-based certifications. And I've really been developing a really wonderful community of practice. And so we come together every 2 months and share cases and stories like we did today. We feature 2 cases and really dig into learning of, applying this framework and the instrument with teams. And, it goes without saying that I think while a lot of us get sort of hooked on surveys and things, really, I think the real hero is the 6 conditions framework, that really gives you a way of thinking about teams. And, what is it we need to get in place to design, launch, and coach teams well? And then sometimes, the survey and the instruments really can be a value add in helping teams, go a little bit more granular and do a little bit more surgical diagnosis about their current state. I wanted to share with you some of our certification options. So we have we've tried to make this really easy. I think a really good value. We have an online certification training, self-directed. It's all video-based. And you basically get in there and you go through a couple of hours, and it's really designed to teach you all you need to know to be able to go out and start using the framework and the survey with teams. You get your first survey as part of that, and that's something you can check out. We then, for some people who really want to get this framework in their bones and start to internalize it, we do a classroom-based training, which we call the level 2. You're required to do the online program as part of it. And so if you sign up for a level 2, you will get access to the online course as well. And you get your, starter TDS as part of that. What I'm really excited about, again, is that we've developed this community of practice. So every 2 months we do these calls, and we're just kind of learning together about really intervening in teams. We have a private LinkedIn group. So there's some, extra, I think, great stuff that we have going on. Ruth and I, Pim, Gabe, and David Pryor, who I'm not sure if he's here on the call yet or today, we're going to be teaching some workshops this fall. So we have some trainings coming up in New York, in Singapore, in the Netherlands, and Philadelphia. And then early next year, we have dates in San Diego and London. So 2 of us will be teaching these courses. So you can check out some more information about that if you're interested to go for a deeper dive in this. We have a special discount if folks want to dig in and jump into a course if you're interested in going a bit deeper. And if you have any questions, you can contact me. In addition to the trainings, for those who might be interested in going deeper, there are a lot of just great resources to get you going right now, resources that are, minimal or free. So the books, obviously, Richard's book, Leading Teams, Setting the Great Performances, I think is really one of the best books on teams. And I think, Ruth, I've heard you say on just leadership in general, great book. And, if you're interested in leadership teams, I can't think of a better book than Ruth's Senior Leadership Teams book. And then the Collaborative Intelligence 2011 one is a great read on the application of this framework in a specific industry, but is, I think, good reading for people not just interested in the intelligence world, but just teams in general. Lots of great articles to check out. One of the things I came across was a 2005 article, A Theory of Team Coaching by Ruth and Richard, that really kind of, I think, is really one of the best and one of the only academic articles written on team coaching that has sort of an empirical standpoint to it. I think it really helps you think about the timing of interventions, the beginning, middle, and end phases of a team's life cycle, and which kinds of coaching are most valuable. Ruth's article in 2006, How Leaders Foster Team Self-Management, the relevant effects of design activities and hands-on coaching, another one you may want to check out. And if you're interested in learning more about the research behind the Team Diagnostic Survey, there's an article there. We have lots of additional stuff. You can read blog posts. We've done podcasts, other webinars, articles. You can check that out at teamdiagnosticsurvey.com. Also at the Team Coaching Zone, we have some content there as well. I saw one of you asked in the window what the discount code was. Again, we can give you access to these slides. I'll send around to all the people who registered today the slide deck and a replay of this webinar if you want to go back and listen there. I know we are kind of coming up. We're right at the hour. So I know we have a lot more comments in the chat window, and maybe like all good webinars, and I like to say also on my podcast, leave people a little bit hungry, but there's only so much you can boil the ocean in an hour. We hope that you walked away today with at least one idea or concept that is useful for you as you think about your work in teams. And thank you all for joining today. I know there's some great, again, comments in the chat. And what I'll do is download the comments in the chat and send those around with the slides and also a link to the replay of the webinar in case you want to check those out. And really good stuff there. So Gabe, Ruth, Pim, anything you guys want to say in closing to be complete for today? And then we can stay.
Okay, you want me to pick you up?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just, I would say, and going back to just what we started at the beginning, which was there's so much great research out there that I think we all need to rediscover. For some reason, we're not, I mean, I every article I read about team this, team that, it's really just goes back to Ruth and Richard's work, honestly, at the end of the day. So I think rediscovering it and really making it real as opposed to trying to reinvent how we're dealing with teams. There's a lot of stuff already out there that's based on evidence and deep research. So it's the first place I go.
Thank you for that, Gabe. I appreciate that, and just want to reiterate my thanks to all of you for the great stories. I always learn so much from all of you, and thank you so much for those of you who participated in our conversation today. I hope that you got some things out of here that are helpful to your thinking and to your practice. And Krister, thank you again so much for organizing us and making this conversation possible.
Beautiful. And I want to thank you all for joining the webinar. Really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you all. I'll just say my closing comment. I think I launched my podcast a little bit almost 4 years ago. And I remember when I started talking about the idea of coaching teams, executive coaching had become this big movement, and we started talking about coaching teams. I would get this sort of deer in the headlights look. And, I think most of us have been used to maybe one-off team retreats and all that. And I think what's exciting is I think we're really sort of witnessing the coming of age of really moving to seriously team-centric organizations. Teams and teaming have been a hot topic for a long time, but I think now it's becoming like real business. And I think the rise of the Agile movement pushing us to really think about even getting even more disciplined and, really working in much more nimble ways. And really at the core of that is really about teams. I mean, I think if you look at Eric Rice's book on the startup way, team is at the center of all that. So I think this is just a great time for all of us to be in this space. And, again, I think, we go back to that quote from Richard at the top of the webinar that, teams can accomplish amazing, magical things, but, it does require a little bit of deliberation. But I think there is a promise there that together we can do things that we can't do just working alone in parallel. And so, if we can get over some of those risks and pitfalls, I think it's just a great thing to be part of a great team and have a purpose that creates a great team to do something meaningful in the world. So hope you guys took some inspiration from today and some value, and we'll look forward to staying in touch. And again, I will be circulating around some follow-ups material from this session. So
I have a question with a use case of TDS. How frequently do you think you could reasonably measure and then remeasure a team and expect different results? So the context I'm getting into is then from a team coaching package, is 3 months too quick? Would you need at least 6 months to get a reasonable difference? And basically, it's, at its simplest use case, it's pre and post, and then a bit more ongoing. It's that this could be part of an ongoing diagnostic. Is there a certain frequency that would be optimal for this?
It's a great question, Robert. Good to see you, by the way.
Yeah, great to see you guys again.
Yeah. What I would say there is I think it's really probably contingent on the team. I don't think a couple of months is too long. So, for example, I think the leadership team that I spoke about, I measured them before they came, but I'm going to try to measure them before the year's over. And I imagine we're going to see some drastic differences in the TDS. But I think some of it's probably a function of the urgency and maybe the cadence of the team. So if it's a team that's not very urgent, is kind of coming together periodically, it may be a different story. So, but I would say, yeah, for sure, in a couple months, I think you could definitely see some differences depending on what they're doing in between sessions.
And this is kind of a size strata issue. So as much as it's called, the team diagnostic survey, and this, if I remember correctly, it was it 20 or 25 people you could do at once this, and that would probably be actually a 2 or 3 team kind of situation.
Probably,
So like, could one use case being, that let's say you have 3 teams, all part of one 25-person organization, they all get assessed every maybe 3 months, and each team might have its own team coaching thing, or is it better to, it's like, no, because each team has its own cultural stuff going on, its own group stuff going on, you really need 3 different assessments. If you're trying to lump all of them together into one 25-person kind of multi-team assessment, it starts to lose its precision.
It's intended to be a team level instrument, not an organization level instrument. So what you're describing in that case, you really would want to do the TDS on 3 separate teams so that they would know the finite group of people that they're talking about. It's also not an individual level assessment, right? So it's an assessment of the dynamics of what's actually going on in the team as a whole.
Are there ways to compare and contrast if you're doing multiple TDSs, 3 teams, 3 TDSs, or cycles of 3 TDSs? Are there ways to contrast those? You can say, yeah, this whole organization is kind of like this, but this team shows more of these patterns. Is that, or maybe you say, is that useful? Or I don't know, maybe that is.
Yeah. I've actually done. I actually have done it that way, and you can often see things that are thematic in the organization, like we have a problem with stability, or we have a problem with the organizational structures and systems. And you can also see the contrasts among groups, because certain of the conditions are in the hands of individual or particular leaders, and there are real differences in the skill of leaders in, for example, articulating a compelling purpose.
Got it. I love the sound of that. Good. Okay. So
I popped this slide up, Robert. You just got me thinking. For this team I worked with last week, I created a little leadership team quiz for them just to introduce some of the research. And one of the things is many teams we find in the desire to be inclusive end up adding everybody to the team. And what I love, and I stole this. Some of this from Ruth and Richard's work around group size and the number of links, that when you start to get above like 7 members, look at how there's this inflection point, and the number of linkages between team members just grows geometrically, which is depicted by these little images on the left. And so the risk of going above single digits in a team is that you just increase the probability of process losses and bungling and inefficiencies. And I can't think of any leadership team I was a part of recently that I was working with that was less than like 11 or 12 people. And it's like 12 to 20.
So they're all like 50% overloaded. And
Yeah. And so I think what we didn't have time to get into today are like the uses of teams around. Some teams really need to come together just for information sharing and aligning, others to coordinate, initiatives. Some may come together to provide consultation to each other, and others need to make decisions together. And a lot of the leadership teams I'm working with tend to just come together to share information, and they're not really being the decision-making teams that the organization needs them to be.
I see that a lot on boards and other things where there's something exploratory or advisory, and so they're not quite executing yet, but they're trying to somehow share data because there's some trend they're trying to be in the sense of, and that's leading me to something I've been thinking about is this notion of almost like a kind of core team or an execution team, but trying to map out the second degree connection. It's like, well, we need to, so if you think of like a race yard, it's like we need to pull information or we need to be accountable to these other stakeholders, but that's different than the 6 of us, which might do the main clump of the work. And so how do we conceptualize and measure pieces of that from a team standpoint, because it's almost like inner team, outer team connection context. I'm trying to think of a way to frame that up, but these are, anyway, part of the complexity of
First of all, hey, good to see you, Bob. I was wondering if I want to apologize to folks in the chat who are trying to ask questions to me because I am not multitasking. It goes against my lean roots right now. So is Ryan on the call here? He posted me some questions, and if not, that's okay. All right. I see Nick has a question for you as well. So I'm going to go back. How about APAC coaches? Because there's a great question on there, and I probably didn't do a good job of articulating my metaphor. So I'll just jump to it really quick.
Okay, thank you.
So, excellent. All right. So, all right, excellent. So, who is APAC coaches? Let's just.
My name is Michael Schell, and I live and work in Japan.
Awesome. Can you re-articulate your question for the group?
Well, and by the way, I also enjoy the conversation you guys are just having, but I like the ability to jump as well. Now, I was missing the main point that you were making with that analogy with the sports team. I believe you started off by talking about this is structure versus process, and also the cause and effect.
Sure.
And then you talked about how sometimes you can look at the outcome to get information, and sometimes you look at the source. And I think that's where you're coming from.
Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'll start, and then I'll let Ruth pile on and correct me where I go astray here. So the way the lens that you take is if you look at the process, if you take a process view, which is our philosophy, which is we try to make the team feel good. And then we focus on our effort on making them feel good with the expectation that a team feeling good will do outstanding work. And then almost all of your interventions are at the team feeling good level.
I got it. Okay.
Then you step back and go, okay, wait a second, let's take a look at the substance of the environment that they're in and the forces acting upon them first, which might be creating this dysfunctional behaviors at the communication level or at the task execution level. So that's the lens that we take for both. And I think both are useful, by the way. Like you should have both. You should understand that there are times where process intervention is going to be helpful, and there are times where structural intervention is probably going to fix your process issue. So Ruth, I don't know what else you have to say about that.
Yeah, I often get accused of not caring about relationships because I come out by saying like, don't work on the relationships in the team. That's
Ruth, are you an INTJ or something? Like what's the angle here? Are you just like brilliant but cold-hearted? Is that?
That's apparently how people characterize me, and totally unfair because to me, positive relationships among people are one of the outcomes of an effective team. And so I'm just suggesting put it in a different place in the causal chain. People come to trust and respect each other as a consequence of having accomplished something meaningful together. So if what you want to do is to develop, brilliant, loving, mutually supportive working relationships between people, intervene at the level of creating the conditions for them to do meaningful work together. I often get, as I say, misquoted on that aspect of it. But the point is that these outcomes are interrelated with each other, but the quality of relationships is not in the middle of the causal chain between the conditions and how effective a team is in terms of its performance effectiveness.
Last week in my team example, because I think the team spent 8 months not working within a context of a well-designed team, the emergent processes were screaming for attention. So I actually had to start by spending an hour and a half creating safety in the room and helping them. So I actually did process work in order to create the conditions, then get into the design work. And then, we came back to process work at the end of the 2 days. So I think it's a circular, they're interdependent. It's just around timing. Also, I liked I just want to comment on something Joan commented here about just around shadow teams. For sure, I think if you can sit in and not shadow teams, but shadowing teams. Shadow teams are a different kind of team, right? Mm-hmm. But definitely sitting in shadowing teams, I think, can be super helpful. I think this is the creativity we can have is maybe we have specific team sessions where we're facilitating and coaching, and then other times where we're really just getting to observe in the backdrop. And I do a little bit of both. Like in my launches, I'll actually be facilitating a lot, and then I'll drop the team into tasks to actually accomplish something and fade to the back and not facilitate, and just in real time allow that to happen. And then I think that really sets you up so that if you are in a role of shadowing them and coaching them on an ongoing basis, you could keep toggling back and forth between being in the backdrop coaching versus actually driving very specific sessions about their work and their learning, et cetera. So yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it really just opens up the creativity that we can take for helping teams find a way of doing ongoing coaching work that really fits for them and their environment.
Yeah. Hey, you mind if I reward Ryan for his patience and ask him
go for
this
it.
question here? So Ryan, you still on? I hate to think that he muted you.
He may be muted. He just wrote yes, just no mic.
I'm gonna read your question then, and
I've unmuted Ryan just in case. Yeah,
and then you can pipe in on real time if I screw up your question. All right. So the first one is: are there specific variables that equate to environments where you are indeed in a launch? So I take that to mean when do I know that a launch or relaunch is appropriate? Okay, so the easy one is if you're going to have a new team, I almost always launch. I have to have. If someone's asking me what I should do, I will say let's schedule a launch. Especially if they're not going to be non-co-located, which means that I want if they're going to be a geographically dispersed team, then I'm always required that they come together at least for 2 days, so that they get to know each other and do some other social interventions, which will help them understand their own skills. Now, again, I'll defer to Pim and Krister on when relaunches are appropriate. And I think we're all at some point we're like, okay, well, there really are no conditions here, right? And so you really can't build a new house on top of an old house. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to rebuild the foundation. And so in that case, I think it's sort of a judgment call where it could potentially be salvageable if you believe that there are conditions in place, but the first launch didn't go well, like you didn't establish norms, or were you're co-creating the structures in which you're going to work. A relaunch might be appropriate, but sometimes you really need to go back to the drawing board and say, hey, this is not even team work that you're asking them to do. This is actually departmental or committee or working group type of work you're asking them to do. So let's reconsider if actual team is appropriate. So hopefully I answered one of your questions, Ryan. And the second one was around an agile team charter. And so maybe I'll respond to. So I'll read your question verbatim, and then you can correct me. In agile environments with the charter and team norms established, how much are you finding that the charter helps complete the pre-work launch elements of this model? Okay, so obviously there's many ways to do a charter. I will say this, I will ask what a charter is, because everyone has their own idea of what it is, and figure out if they actually link to the 6 conditions. And then what's probably most important is that the charter is potentially is co-created, or there is some buy-in into what it actually is, because sometimes the charter is written by one person and then everyone just follows it. So you don't really have engagement at the way the team is going to work moving forward. So instead of looking for a specific charter, I look at the existence of the 6 conditions in the charter, and then way that it was actually developed. And then I might provide some interventions. Hey, look, maybe it would be a good idea if we articulate this during our launch and make sure we have, we actually agree that this is actually the reason we exist, or the way we want to work. So for instance, like if core norms or some specific norms are built into the charter that maybe the team doesn't agree on, then you're probably going to get off on the wrong foot anyway, right? People aren't going to agree as to how they're going to work. So I don't know if that's your experience as well, Pim, Krister, Ruth.
I was chatting in the window there. I think just about the idea of launches. I think we were talking about 2 days, and I think, Ruth has done rapid launches in an hour and a half with teams that needed to go out, in a couple of days or the next week or whatever, and actually just perform a short team performance together. I
think that's super gutsy as a coach to be able to do such powerful, brief, pointed coaching. Well, that's amazing.
Tasks expand the amount of time you allocate for them, right? So it's amazing how much you can do in a short period of time. One of the teams that I'm working with, I mentioned earlier, has sort of been beaten up over a 10-year period. And so I'm having 3-hour sessions with them on an ongoing basis after interviewing everybody and doing a feedback session. And so I would say we're actually in a phase of relaunching, but it's actually a process rather than an event. And so it's that team, because it was so beaten up and there's so much damage repair to do, that relaunching is more of like a month to 6 week process, or maybe it will be two months by the time, but it's more in pieces. So I think really depending on the team, the length of a launch really could vary. So anyways, just wanted to chime in on that one. that part about launches. And I think relaunches are really useful for all kinds of teams. I think we think about teams tend to work in cycles, right? 4-6 months a year. And so the world changes so much. It makes sense after a year to do a relaunch and just refocus. Purposes may have been clear 6 months ago, maybe because of the dynamic nature of things, they've changed. And, we need to kind of refocus on not just our purpose, but what are our must-win battles, and, how are we working? And so I think that's just a great practice and discipline to be doing periodically with teams.
Hey, I got this question on here from Nick. I don't know if Nick is still on, but he used some acronym that I certainly am familiar with. Okay, so Nick, sounds like you're still on. So I'll answer your question. Is static used in the launch? So I'm going to help everyone out here. So static is something that some of us practicing Kanban use. It's an acronym for systems thinking approach to introducing Kanban. It is absolutely a part of our launch, which is you generate a shared understanding of the work of which you're trying to do with the people doing the work, as opposed to someone else dictating you how the work is going to be done. So we would use this in an actual launch as well as a relaunch. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's really awesome thinking tool using a workshop setting. We usually do it in a day, depending on the context of your team. It could take multiple days. But essentially, if you are getting a group together that either one is trying to improve a process or try to improve the way that they're working, or more importantly, establish the way that they're going to work moving forward. And this is most useful in what we're seeing now is a lot of requests for war room teams, tiger teams, sand dune teams, which is how are we going to work together and what decisions are we going to make to articulate the progress we are making as a team. And so this is where the intervention, so I would consider an agile method a task performing strategy of which you will need some education to be able to do. So that's exactly where we intervene in the launch, is it will give you some education on how to operate your work in an adaptable way, balance your capacity demand, and then really make good decisions and guardrails for how you're going to work moving forward in a collaborative way. So that's how we would use that workshop. There's many other ways to do it. This is sort of the one that generates, what's great for us as Kanban coaches, it generates the workboard. It generates the visualization of the way you're going to move forward in a collaborative way, as opposed to someone just saying, well, I'm going to see 5 stats reports over the next month. Here's the days that you send it to us, and here's the template. That really isn't helpful both for your stakeholder as well as the team. So that's how we leverage that. And by the way, so a plug for the masterclass that I'm doing in New York City for Krister around team coaching with agility for so essentially we're going to introduce some of those concepts, which if you're a team coach and not necessarily familiar with how to introduce agile methods or some techniques in a way that helps your teams work in an adaptive way, we'd love to spend some time with you and share how we do that in the real world with some real case studies.
Awesome. Well, folks, we have been, boiling the ocean here after the hour mark and the webinar. And, as always, sometimes, the best learning happens after the main event. So I think there's some rich conversation and dialogue going on here. So, but maybe we can start to bring today's session to a close. If you had a question that didn't get answered, we apologize for that. But again, hopefully you got some value out today. So thanks everybody for joining. And we'll look forward to seeing you all in future sessions.
Great seeing everyone.
Talk to you guys next
Thanks,
time.
everybody.
Later.
Bye now.